Hello, everyone. Welcome back to this episode of the Rosen Rubini podcast, Making Sense of This World. My name is Manas Chawla, and as always, I'm really pleased to be joined by Brunella Rosa. This week, we're talking about central banks and their tightening cycle, and we're going to do a survey of the major central banks around the world to see if the tightening cycle is still in sight. Brunello, let's get started off with perhaps the most important one. The U.S. Federal Reserve had held its FOMC meeting last week. What were the key takeaways from that?
Last week the Fed FOMC met and they decided to increase interest rates by 25 basis points. This was telegraphed. The market has been knowing that the move would arrive at least for 2 or 3 months by now, and the Fed did not surprise on either side, either the downside or the upside. The interesting bit is what came up, let's say, during the conference, but also partly in the statement, because the Fed used the language that suggests that it might be entering a pause after increasing rates dramatically, I would say, in the last 12, 13 months, 500 basis points in a little more than a year. The Fed maintains some form of hawkish bias, saying that if it's needed, they can increase rates more, but the market actually got more excited about the fact that the Fed might be entering a pause rather than being scared about potential new hikes going forward. So there was a hawkish bias, but there was a sort of dovish reaction by the market.
Sure, and we saw the ECB hold its governing council meeting. Did they come to similar conclusions?
Yeah, very similar. They increased rates by 25 basis points, and that's a deceleration compared to the 50 basis points of March, for example. Instead, they also announced that further decisions will need to be made in the future regarding future interest rates hikes. So effectively, they kind of signaled that there will be more hikes to come, most likely in June and July. But by the summer, probably they will also have gone with interest rates increases. And actually, in July themselves, they will start stop reinvesting maturing bonds from the APP portfolio. So effectively, that would be another source of tightening from the ECB balance sheet. So effectively, the ECB has lowered its kind of rate of increases of rates, but at the same time, they have accelerated the reduction of the balance sheet. So overall, quite a hawkish, I would say, statement.
Sure, and if we look at the Bank of Australia and the Bank of England, what happened in those major central banks?
So RBA also surprised the market with the 25 basis points increase to 3.85%. Again, this has been yet another increase by the RBA, which has been normalizing rates for more than a year now. And this is because inflation remains way too high, 7%, which is, twice as much as the maximum allowed by their mandate, even more than that. So again, the RBA was a central bank that needed to kind of finish its job. They might be increasing rates further, but again, they will probably decide meeting by meeting. Bank of England meets this week. So on Thursday, they will announce what they will do. Most likely, they will also increase rates by 25 basis points. Because inflation remains in double digit, which is not at all acceptable. So clearly the Bank of England has more work to do. And also the reduction of the balance sheet is being, I would say, a bit slower than in other cases, definitely slower than the Federal Reserve. So, at some point they might need to do to make an announcement regarding that.
Sure. I mean, how do these sort of trends then evolve kind of in the near future? Because it seems like central banks are having to balance between many different priorities. Do you have any sort of other predictions about the next few months?
So it seems like most central banks are kind of reaching the peak of the tightening cycle, at least for now, even if some have still ground to cover. But the increase in interest rates has been dramatic, as I said before, and it was large, so it was kind of very sizable. Then it was rapid. If you look at the speed of the increases, is by far the fastest in recent history, and it was coordinated. So kind of no place to hide. All central banks did the same across the globe. So that was a coordinated tightening in monetary policy that was definitely felt by market participants, in particular those invested in equities and credit, but also clearly also sovereign bonds. And this rapid increase and large and coordinated increase in interest rates had an impact, of course, on economic activity that has been slowing down. To some extent, also inflation, which has peaked but remains stubbornly high. So central banks had to juggle between slowing growth and still sticky inflation. And more recently, there's a third element that was added, which was the kind of financial instability episodes that have been starting to pop up around the globe in the US and in Europe, the SVB, Signature Banks, and Silvergate in the US, Credit Suisse in Europe. Then there were tensions on Deutsche Bank. So clearly, when interest rates reach a certain level, potentially a level that the Fed has called financial instability rate, financial instability episodes start to emerge. So there's a lot to juggle for central banks. Definitely a difficult job for them, but that's kind of the result, among other shocks, clearly, including the war, including the pandemic, that were totally exogenous to central banks' activity, but is also the results of 15 years of easy liquidity given to the market. And we see that it ended up in sort of unexpected shores, so to speak. And so there's something that has been manufactured by central banks. Other shocks, as I said, were totally exogenous, but they still have to deal with that.
Right. I mean, if we sort of revisit our discussion last week of how slowly some of these financial instability crises often materialize, seeing as, the tightening cycle at the end is in sight, I suppose this might well be the calm before the storm. So certainly something to look out for in the next few weeks to months. Brunello, as always, thank you so much for your time and insight.
Thank you. Until next time.